Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk. Today, I'm doing a one-on-one with U.S. Army veteran and former Trump supporter, Mr. David Weissman. David, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So you're based in Florida, right?
Correct.
And we know that Florida is pretty much a red state. So had you been a Republican pretty much your whole life up until recently?
That is correct. I've always voted Republican.
So let's go back to 2016. We're just going to jump right into it. We have about 8 or 10 Republican candidates. Was Trump your first choice, or was there somebody else that you were kind of rallying behind that you were hoping would be president of the United States?
Yes. In fact, I actually wanted to vote. I voted for Ted Cruz in a primary election.
So you were extremely conservative.
Yes, and that's actually how I told people how conservative I was by saying that's who I picked first.
So what was it about Ted Cruz that made you want to vote for him and put your support behind him?
Well, at the time, like when I really got into politics, I believed in the Constitution, a conservative view on the Constitution, because, like I said, I've always been that, and I believe that he represented what conservatives were about,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, I also believed in the demonizing of liberal values and Democrats, and so it was easy to pick Ted Cruz, someone who's been in the system, for a long time, knows how the game works.
Right.
And I felt that he was the right candidate for president at the time.
So when you say you believed in the demonizing of Democrats and liberal views, what were some of those views that you were just completely opposed to when you were a Republican?
Sure. I believed that they wanted to take all of our weapons away. I believed that they care about illegal aliens over military. They supported Islamic terror. They were an enemy. They were an enemy of America. I believed in all of that stuff.
And you would believe that your whole life, pretty much.
Correct.
So was your family Republican as well?
Yes.
Okay. So we get to now the Republican nominations, and it's Donald Trump. Were you happy about that? Were you surprised? Did it matter? You were going to be voting Republican anyways. What were your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I was a little upset that Cruz lost, but I also like Trump as well. I mean, the ideologies between Trump and Cruz were very, very, very similar.
Okay.
And so it was a pretty easy choice to make when he became the nominee. So yeah, it was a pretty simple switch. I mean, you know, you still had the demonizing of the Democrats that was going on. So there was no hesitation to go all in for MAGA when he became the nominee.
Right. So you vote for him, he becomes the president of the United States. What was the turning point for you when you realized, oh, this isn't what I thought I voted for, this isn't the person that's backing the kind of ideals that I want, or even when you changed your mindset about certain ideals? Like, just what was the turning point for you?
Okay, well, it was a very unique journey. A lot of it came through dialogue about democratic values, liberal values. And how that started was when, at the time on Twitter, a lot of conservatives were complaining about being shadow banned, which is where they feel they're being suppressed, low engagements, so they feel like they're being ignored. So at that time, I was like, why are conservatives being shadow banned when you have liberal celebrities like Sarah Silverman and Stephen Colbert, wearing Nazi outfits and all crazy kind of stuff? And I actually made a tweet about that. So, and normally when you go on Twitter and you interact with Hollywood, you normally get blocked because you're always attacking them and always going after them because you feel like Hollywood is part of that Democratic MSM coalition that wants to take over America. And so I actually got a response from Sarah Silverman, which was pretty surprising, and she explained what her humor of being gallows humor was about, which is pretty much trying to get people talking and reaction to people, not necessarily to offend anyone, but just to get people talking. So I was kind of surprised that she responded at first, and then I kind of realized, if she's dialogue. I mean, why not find out why she likes Trump? I mean, Trump is, or why she doesn't like Trump. So I thought, she's Jewish, I'm Jewish. He's pro-Israel. What gives? Why don't you like Trump? And we had a respectful discourse on why she did it, and I told him why I did, and it was pleasant. Like I said, on Twitter it's always so polarizing attacks.
Yeah.
Owning the libs. So then later on, I kind of thought, well, that was kind of pleasant, and it's still, the sort of social media war is still going on about liberal values, and so I want to find out, okay, why do liberals believe in the things they do, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So then I responded to her because she responded to me before, and I said, okay, why do you guys care more about illegal aliens than military? And then she actually responded again, saying that's not true. You actually care. You can actually do both. You can care about immigrants because we're a nation of immigrants, and you can still care about the military. The Democratic Party has a lot for the military, and I learned from when she quoted a lot of her followers came in, joined in the conversation, learned about. It was a Democrat that created a GI Bill. It was a Democrat that you know done so many different things for the military that I didn't know, because I was always led to believe that the GOP was pro-military.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that when it comes to immigration, there are human rights laws, not just what we think is legal and illegal immigration. They're seeking asylum. There's a lot of the problems actually come through the port of entry, not necessarily an invasion like the right-wing media tends to make it out to be. So a lot of the stuff that I realized is starting to be like, wait a minute, this is what's going on
Yeah,
here.
it's not true. Yeah.
So, so then I started asking more questions, like, why do, why do Democrats want to take guns away? And as someone as progressive as she is, saying, no, we don't want to take your guns away. That was like, and then like, whoa, like, another thing added on that right-wing media was wrong about. So, I mean, I'm really wondering, like, why am I being lied to here by conservative media? Because, that's something that I trusted on for so many years when it came to news.
So you were met with compassion, and that's what really made you kind of open your mind, open your willingness to listen and to understand, simply because of how she interacted with you.
Correct. There was no insults. There was no arguing. I'm right. She accepted who I was. She accepted who I supported, and that's one of the things that really brought down my wall is when I, started to learn some of these democratic values were
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Conservative media made them out to me.
Right, right.
I began to learn a lot more. I started talking to more people. I started talking to Women's March people, learned about racism, what's going on, with police brutality, different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Colin Kaepernick Neal, and and Sarah saw that, and she actually sort of gave me a huge shout out, saying, hey, and I can actually show you the tweet, when I get a chance. That's where she said, we became Twitter friends. He loves Trump, I know, but we realized that we're not so different. And after that, that really brought my wall down.
Yeah.
Of hate from Democrats, and I thought I wanted to learn more. And I just kept learning more, asking questions, learning about Obama, learning Clinton, learning that, hey, Obama's actually a pretty decent president.
Yeah.
He pretty much just tried to do what Sarah Silverman did, is try to get people like me to open their eyes and, realize that, hey, there are other different points of view in our country. It's not the white evangelicals that think that own this country. There's like so many, it's a melting pot.
Yeah.
And so throughout this journey, asking questions, a lot of Trump supporters were getting a little, aggravated or upset, saying, "Hey, I'm closing in with Democrats. Is he a sellout? Is he a traitor?" And you get different backlashes, just for dialoguing.
Right.
Because when I guess a lot of it was, when I learned how the Republican Party values were a lot of one about isms of the Democratic Party. That's when I decided to leave the Republican Party first before I actually stopped Trump support, because I
Hmm.
realized a lot of the stuff that they preached for so many years was wrong.
Right. So Sarah was a huge factor in helping you kind of just change your opinion altogether. But I'm wondering, even before she interacted with you, why were none of the other things that Trump did and said deal breakers for you? I mean, there were so many terrible comments that just as a human being you shouldn't say, but even as the leader of the free world and the president of the United States, like you never took a moment to just say like, oh, that was inappropriate, or he probably shouldn't have said that. Like, how did you excuse and justify the things that he would say and the daily tweets that he would put out before you decided to take away your support from him and had this conversation with Sarah?
Well, there was different factors. I had a similar worldview um, as he did when it came to like Muslims and immigrants, so I didn't think that was bad at all. When it came to grabbing women by I, as a guy who was in the army, and a lot of stuff was said in the locker room and defended it as locker room conversation, and he felt like other things about it was fake news, because when you're conservative, you always believe that a lot of the liberal media was fake news. It was
Mm-hmm.
always an attack on conservatives, Republicans. So they didn't really give it the time of day to see, hey, they can be right about him. So,
So, so for you with Trump, before you left the Republican Party and before you stopped supporting him, what were the two issues for you that made you want to support him?
definitely security. I felt that he was strong against Islamic terror. And also that I believe that he was a successful businessman to help bring the economy.
Okay, okay. So economy was important to you.
Right, and
Because
security.
that seems to be a general consensus with a lot of people in the Republican Party. You know, they care about the economy, they care about abortion. It's a huge thing in the Republican Party as well. But I've noticed that a lot of these statements that they make, they're not really backed up with their actions. And I don't know that now that you've become a liberal and you're kind of on the other side of the fence, if you're starting to see any kind of hypocrisy or lies or inconsistencies from the Republican Party, from the things that they say and the things that they do.
Yeah, I see that now. It's clear as day. It's crazy. It's
Yeah.
like, I mean, especially when it comes to like defending the Constitution, and it's amazing how they just turn a blind eye to it. I mean, it's like when it comes to racism, um, constitutional violations, or anything like that. If a Democrat does it, now they're all over it. But when
Hmm.
one of their own does it, they act like it doesn't even exist, like it didn't even happen.
So the phrase "Make America Great Again," what did that mean for you?
I guess what that meant for me was, where America used to have, uh, good, economy, good security. I kind of realized that it means a lot of things for other people,
Hmm.
but there's probably racist tone to it.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I didn't realize it was at the time because my worldview was a lot different back then.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible to hear how drastic of a change it is because I know, I mean, I dialogue with people on Twitter and on Facebook a lot that have opposing views, and it's kind of like once you're in that hole so deeply, it's hard to get out of it. So I'm just impressed that you were so willing to listen and you were able to have civil conversations because, and I'm sure now that you're on this side of things, you're being met, like you mentioned, you're being met with a lot of vitriol from Trump supporters and people that are on part of MAGA, and they don't even like you talking to people, which that has to be hard to be on the receiving end of that now for you.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy because for so many years I was the one doing that, and now being on a receiving end, it's definitely a different feeling, especially like through this journey. I learned how one of the biggest things that I learned about the Democrats is like they don't um, they're not trying to take their rights away. They try to fight for rights of others, and seeing what other people outside of my public go through definitely softened my heart in many, many ways, which is why I talk about having empathy, for immigrants, for people of color, for, Muslims, different groups that I never really thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing all that, seeing all the injustice they go through, really affected me. And so I try to be, I mean, yeah. There are times where I get frustrated and angry at some of the stuff Trump does now, but it's sort of different. It's not like a hateful anger. It's more
Mm-hmm.
like there's so much wrong going on. You try to get this one about it, but so yeah. So when you dialogue, they feel so victimized, so they attack you and they try to silence you. And some of the people that I knew when they do that, it's kind of like kind of hurtful, and especially when they knew me, or and because I had met a lot of different connections when I was on the right, and
Right.
some
Yeah.
of them they just shun you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's
there's a lot of
crazy.
different reactions, and
Yeah.
and then you have the obsessed ones that try to, I've learned how to thick skin in doing what I do, and so I learned it soon about, but they still go on your mentions and try to defame you and try to get people not to like you, so you will stop, but it's not working.
Right.
But yeah, there are a lot of different responses and reactions from Trump supporters, and there have been some that I actually had decent dialogue with, and
Good.
I encourage that when it happens.
Which I always find so interesting that there is such an anger coming from that side, especially because they're a party that does align themselves with Christianity and Christian values. And I know you mentioned you're Jewish, but when you look at what Christianity and what those values are supposed to be, it is the complete opposite of how they're acting. And I always found that interesting because I view myself as a Christian and I grew up in the church, but I would think that wanting to have equal rights for everybody and truly loving your neighbor as yourself is what they should be doing. And I feel like I've never actually seen that behavior. And I definitely never saw it from Trump. So I was so surprised that so many people that are within the Christian base and faith communities voted for him and support him, because to me it's completely opposite of what you're saying you believe in.
I think a lot of that comes from fear.
Mm,
A lot of right-wing media for so many years, especially during Obama's presidency, because many Christians believe that he was Muslim, for one thing,
yeah.
um, believe that their rights are being taken right away as Christians.
Mm,
With the war on Christmas, that Hannity and O'Reilly
right.
used to, uh, you know, force out people's throats. Like, oh, they're not allowed to practice their Christian faith in public places. In reality, it's just asking for a consideration of other faiths.
Right,
But
right.
they always felt that their First Amendment rights were being jeopardized. Hence, why they believe that they was going to take rights away. And so a lot of that. So when they have Trump, someone who's has no decency, no um, will just speak his mind. That was one of the things I liked about him at the time, because normally politicians work well with each other, and I guess the conservative. I was part of the Tea Party, conservative right wing, where they felt that those kind of politicians aren't conservative enough,
Mm,
and so we always felt like, oh, they're part of the deep state. They're part of the rhinos. They're not going to fight for our rights.
right.
That's why Trump was different, because he didn't hold back. You know, he knew what his base wanted, and he spoke for his base.
Exactly. And he's still doing that. It's really crazy and wild to see. So, for you though, was there a specific action of Trump that really made you take a step back and say, okay, yeah, I can't support this guy anymore? I know you had the dialogue on Twitter, you were engaging with more
Yes,
liberals and Democrats, but what was the specific action of Trump's that was an absolute deal breaker for you?
I think there was sort of a two-step uh, deal. One, well, being a veteran and and serving for many years,
Hmm. How
learning
many years did you serve again?
13.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I guess I became more open-minded to learn about Trump after learning that conservative media was wrong about Obama and Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's some of the things I learned, like, he wasn't really a successful businessman. He had a lot of failures, and he had a lot of corruption in the way he built the business for many years. And one of the biggest things that really got to me was that he dodged a draft 5 times. I mean, this whole time I thought he was a patriot, cared about the military, cared about our country, all American, for the flag. I mean, for the flag, you stand for the flag, you salute, and then to learn that he was a draft dodger, 5 times, that was like one of the biggest like blows that I had. And then,
He dodged it 5 times?
yeah,
Wow,
five
I didn't know it was
times.
5 times. Wow, okay, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
That is, I mean, especially with, being the Republican Party is supposedly like the patriotic party.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, like, so that sort of, like, realized that, this is not who I voted for, because I pictured him to be something else. And, that's when I kind of decided, I'm kind of done being a Trump supporter and realized more that all he's doing is just, spitting out hate, because I learned to have empathy through my journey here. And, like, what really like put the nail in the coffin was his meeting with Putin in Helsinki.
Mm.
Our adversary, um, behind closed doors, being left recorded by the Russians, and I that was like, and I couldn't believe how Hillary Clinton predicted that and knew that, from
Mm-hmm.
the debates, and I just like I couldn't believe how right she was, and I even did a whole thread like saying, you're absolutely right, and um, that's when I never really looked back, and I just and more you see how dangerous and reckless of a president he is,
Mm-hmm. So currently, when you're looking at the country, how do you feel?
um, with a new outlook, new worldview, and it's definitely not the country that I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
We have so many issues going on that we need to fix. Race relations, medical care.
Mm-hmm.
The coronavirus now. I mean, I don't know. It's like sort of like a letdown. I mean,
Yeah.
America is like this great superpower, but no, this country has so many different problems. And they have a president all he's doing is tweeting about it. He's not, or in golfing, he's not really. I get that he has limited powers, which is definitely a good thing. But president can do so much more. Um, he's just doing the bare minimum.
When you were a Republican and a Trump supporter, did you ever feel like you had to hide your support for Trump?
Oh no, I definitely did not. In fact, I had a lot of pictures of me wearing a Trump gear and Trump hat. Those in rallies. I definitely was not afraid of showing support.
So you were totally proud of it then.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was. Now I'm ashamed that I
Yeah.
did.
I was gonna
But
say, so looking back, you do feel ashamed and you regret it.
oh yeah, I definitely did. I mean, it was two things about it. I mean, there was a con job of thinking that he was something else, and there's also the racism factor
Yeah.
part of it too.
Yeah.
So there's two different. Um, you know, if that makes sense to you.
No, yeah, absolutely. So you also have a Facebook group that is full of former Trump supporters. What is the tone like within that group, and what's kind of been the general consensus about the last 4 years?
Well, the tone has been pretty amazing. There's definitely a lot of former Trump supporters in the group, and there's also never Trumpers, because I felt they were key in my journey as far as encouraging me to keep speaking out. So I felt like other Trump supporters, former Trump supporters, should have that.
Mm-hmm.
And one reason why I created this group was to create a safe space for them. Well, because I mentioned before about the trolling of a former Trump supporter. This way they have like the goal of this group is to have them vent out everything, and also let people know, hey, I'm not the only one. There's lots of us out there, and so a lot of the people seem to have stopped supporting him because of the way he's handling the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and that seems to be like an eye opener for many.
The lack of responsibility that he's taking
Correct.
on in regards to the pandemic. Yeah, because it's been rough. It's been a really rough few months that, he knew about it, didn't do anything, and now look at us. The US has the worst cases out of any country, and it's sad to see how many deaths are happening and that the cases are just rising and rising, and there hasn't been any leadership in regards to the pandemic that you would expect from the president. So I imagine this pandemic in general, even though I think a lot of the things before should have been deal breakers, but I could see that this specific situation would be a huge deal breaker for a lot of people.
Right. I mean, absolutely. I mean, even Republicans in general, are trying to do the right thing by wearing masks and
Mm-hmm.
social distancing. It seems like to me that only the core base that seems to be fringe um, on the guidelines. But so yeah, a lot of people are kind of like saying like, "Wow, well, why is this guy acting like
Yeah. Yeah.
so unhinged?" And so many people have died in this pandemic.
Unhinged is the correct word for sure. So,
Definitely.
speaking to, because a lot of my listeners and fan base, they're liberals and Democrats. Some of them are moderates, but I would say majority of them are anti-Trump. How do you get through to, or figure out how to converse with other Trump supporters? I mean, I know you were met with compassion, and Sarah was very kind to engage with you and help you start to see the light. But it is very difficult sometimes because I think conversations with people that have opposing views, it always turns into this yelling match, so to speak, even though you're on Facebook or Twitter. So, what would you say is the best approach to try to get through to a Trump supporter, to get them to listen, to try to get their viewership outside of Fox News to see a different perspective, to really look at
Well,
facts? How would you tell my listeners to do that?
I would say is just accept them for who they are. Have no expectations of changing them. Just talk.
Mm,
We need to get to a place where we can talk again. And that is the big thing. Once we had conversations going, then I was I was encouraged to learn more. So I think without having the intention of that might help out. Healing our country to be
hmm
able to talk again, talk with each other.
Yeah, it's so difficult with social media nowadays because you aren't talking to people face to face, and I feel like
Right.
if people were talking face to face, it probably would be way more civil, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. Especially like they won't be under pressure too, because everybody sees each other's tweets and
Exactly.
replies.
Exactly. It's just like kind of like this mob mentality of everybody getting on
Yeah,
board to attack a
exactly.
certain person. Yeah, that happens so much, and I can see why people would they start to just go the negative way in how they're responding because it's easier to do that.
Right.
So this election that's coming up in 2020, you have made the decision that you are voting for Joe Biden. I've seen you tweet about that. Um, why do you think? I mean, there's so many obvious reasons, but why do you think he is the better candidate as opposed to Trump?
Um, he has experience, compassion. He had medical care plans. He has experience having a pandemic playbook. He has plans on gun reform. He's tackling all the different um, issues that this country needs fixing on.
Mm-hmm.
He knows how to, lead. Uh, he knows how to take responsibility. The situation with the whole terrorism, issue. He came out and said, you know what, go ahead and search my records. I have nothing to hide.
Right.
That takes courage and leadership and transparency, something that we don't have right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like so many different qualities that Joe Biden has that I think is why that he should be president
That's
come
great.
November.
That's great. So before we wrap up, I just want to ask one more question of you.
Sure.
If there's one thing that you would want a Trump supporter currently to look at in Trump's record to make them change their mind, what would be the one situation you would say, hey, look at how he responded to this? It could be the pandemic, it could be anything else, but I'm just curious for you, if you were to give them one piece of evidence to show them, like, hey, Trump is not the president that you think that he is, what would it be?
the way he treats military and veterans, for sure.
And I know that's very personal for you, of course.
Definitely. And the way, Republicans claim to be the party that cares about military and veterans. So, look at the facts of that, the situation with Russia putting a bounty on American forces and his response to that, how he feels about POWs, people with PTSD. There's like so many different facts on the way he feels about veterans and military. Anything, look at that.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much, David. Where can my listeners follow you?
Sure. You can follow me at Twitter at David M. Weissman. And I also write for Times of Israel.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you so much for tuning in. And we will talk to you again real soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at We Need to Talk the Podcast and Twitter at _We Need to Talk _.